So, now that Pascal has situated the political context in which this meeting and what I'm about to discuss is occurring, I decided to focus on titling my side of the presentation, Forecasting Mankind's Survival. Because it's really here at this domain that we're seeing now, at this particular battle that we're seeing over the issue of forecasting and the earthquake issue, the coming together of the political and scientific fight, which up until now a lot of people have been keeping in different parts of their mind's considerations. Because you have your idea of there's the political, the economic side of life, which is just sort of manipulating social theory. There's human beings, they have desires, and that's the domain of where I learned about politics. And then you got to the domain of science, which is rigorous fact collecting to create models that better and better describe or approximate our universe. And these two things are generally kept aside. Now we're coming down to the point where we're seeing that the issue of how the human mind comes to know how that universe in which it evolved operates, and by making such discoveries act upon that universe to change it for the better, is not just the domain of science, but it's also the domain of politics. And this is now what we're seeing coming through with the two different sides of the fight today, where there is an impulse to survive. We see that coming through what Pascal went through with Russia, with China, and there are networks within, leading networks, that are taking the lead in considering, based upon what we know of earthquakes, what we know of the earth upon which we exist, how human beings can save lives for the future. Because there's a lot waiting for us out there that we still just don't understand. But the key here is that we can forecast earthquakes. We don't have it down to a precise, perfect science that we can figure out 100% of the time. But to varying greater and greater degrees, human beings have been forecasting earthquakes for thousands of years. Now, again, the actual establishment of this as a science, an actual object of science as such, is a relatively new phenomenon. But we have records going back to ancient China, where people had been observing things like the chemicals that would be emanating from the soil, the different animal species that would behave in a very bizarre way, that would give people indications that something, you might not know exactly what is going to happen, but something is happening, because we're in a very dynamic, changing ball, moving through a very dynamic universe. And on the other side, you have a political intention to cover this up, because it's also been known for a very long time that with ignorance, with confusion, with fear, a population is best controlled. And the more people know about the processes that govern their destinies, the less they're afraid, and the less they can be manipulated by people who come offering security in exchange for some freedoms. And this is what we're seeing coming through now in all networks. People who are both self-conscious as being a part of the suppression of knowledge, as well as those who are just, in a certain sense, victims, but as Pascal went through, the sort of bread-fed scholar, people who have made their livings carving themselves into a certain mode of thinking that got them peer-reviewed papers published, that made them careers, by which their very identity, sadly, has been associated, who are instinctually, not out of any ill will for the human species, but instinctually attacking those very discoveries which are now coming out, which would allow the human species as a whole to survive into the future. And this U.S. Geological Survey, I can't go from one meeting to another. That'll go to the next slide. Now this U.S. Geological Survey isn't just attacking the very fact of mankind's capacity to forecast earthquakes, volcanoes, seismic activity, but they've actually been, what our movement has actually discovered over the past week is that they've been fudging the data, taking the statistical occurrences of earthquakes over the past century and saying, well, okay, even though everyone is asking, are we having more earthquakes now? It seems like every time you turn on the TV, something else is happening, right? But you go to their myths section on their website, and sure enough, they say, oh no, that's not true. Actually, if you investigate all of the 7-point earthquakes or more, they've actually been decreasing statistically since over the last 100 years, especially in the last decade. And sure enough, if you actually check out the statistics, yes, if you just look at every single earthquake that's been above 7 points, they've been decreasing. We've been having less. But here's the fudge, here's the rub. When you look at every single, if you say, let's look at every single 8-point and above earthquake, now we're talking a huge jump in magnitude, 8 points to 7 points. 8 points is 33 times the magnitude of a 7-point earthquake. It's an exponential growth. A 9-point is about 1,000 times more than an 8-point. So if you take every single, in your mind now, right? You say, I'm going to look only for those 8-point and more earthquakes and see how they've progressed. Have they gone down? And in fact, what we come up with at this point is that we're seeing the greatest jump from 2013 from the 1990s to 23, from 2000 to 2010. And we've had, in the last few years, we've had 2 9-point earthquakes already. The last 9-point earthquake that we had, anybody know when the last 9-point earthquake was before this decade? Huh? Indonesia was one, yeah. We had Japan, Indonesia. But who knows before Indonesia, before the year 2000, when the last 9-point earthquake
Was
hit?
in LA?
No, that was 8. No, that was less than 9. It was actually the 1960s. Yeah. I don't want to show them that yet. That's okay.
If you want to.
It's okay. It's all right. Yeah, no, last time we'd seen anything like this was in the mid-1960s.
Where?
For some reason it's escaping me, but I'll get back to you.
Alaska, 1964.
Alaska in 1964? Right. So, there is actually a greater intensity, and our capacity to forecast these things is located on how we choose to move our minds. What method do we choose to investigate these phenomena? And most people today, I know certainly I, before we started to discuss, like really digging into this, before the Japan earthquake, most people today tend to think of volcanic activity, earthquakes, massive natural disasters, as being somewhat chaotic phenomena, you know? Like they happen, it's really shitty that it happens, you don't know where the next one's going to be. You know, there's certain places that are of a greater likelihood than others, but we really don't know. There's kind of an air of tense nervousness, especially if you live on the coast of Indonesia or something. You know? And so they happen. You consider, well, okay, it's chaos, it's unluck. And this is not true. This is the fact that we can actually make actions, not only discover when these things will occur, but then make the important actions to save millions of lives. And the fact that that's being held back is already an intention to genocide. Considering that there is an intention, this isn't just misfortunate mistakes.
It's a cover-up.
Yes. And so what do we know, right? You take a look at the world, and we've made a series of videos. I'm not going to go through all of the science necessarily here in this presentation, but I will try and give a general
You
overview.
have to explain that we're doing translation. I think people don't understand. We're translating.
Or maybe you could stand up
back more or something?
Oh, sure, yeah, that might be a good idea if you guys do go back a little bit more.
Stand up and
avoid this trouble.
translate for everybody.
What was that? Keep open.
No,
Parce que
no, standing up is not so
je
good.
parle anglais.
No, that's not such a good idea. But that's okay. Yeah. So we are doing some translations back for those who didn't hear. You can feel free to get back. We made a series of videos on the website around the issue of the rim of fire, which is here generalized on the map. This is the hot spots of the world, where the greatest tectonic activity occurs in terms of the density over time. And what we see, obviously, we know it's the Pacific Rim of Fire because it's red. And these things began, remember, this year in New Zealand, Christchurch. They've been moving up through Japan. We were seeing similar earthquakes happen across Chile, South America. And many scientists are around who are looking at the proper variables right now around the world are warning that we have to pay very close attention to this area around Vancouver all the way up down to California. This is called the Cascadia Subduction Zone, right? And this is where we've had a very high degree of tension buildup over the years. And we have not seen anything major there for up to 300 years, especially along Vancouver. And so you have a huge amount of tension buildup. We're going into something we've not experienced yet, and we should be prepared. But the thing we've been coming across, especially here in North America, like we've been discussing with many of the various leading seismologists, volcanologists in McGill, and various universities across Canada, as well as people on the Canadian Seismic Research Network, who have been set up to investigate just what degree of preparedness Canada is in should anything like this actually occur. Because we know that we have not made the preparations the way Japan had. And we've been talking to these people, and I gotta admit at first, before going into this, I had a few delusions. I thought maybe, maybe these guys they're actually real scientists, they were on the field, they were actually thinking about scientific principles. Maybe these guys would actually be receptive to the fact that new discoveries have been introduced to predict the Japan earthquake 10 days in advance. These things are being introduced in the conference in Vienna now, the Global Seismology Conference. And reality confronted me pretty solid in doing so. Which is just that there's a direct antagonism to the very idea of prediction. And if anything, predicting these things. And what we'd encountered is that where you did get occasional open-mindedness of the potential that may, mostly people said when we asked, to what degree are you looking at the sky? Are you looking at the moon or the sun, right? Cosmic radiation, because we are in a sea of electromagnetic cosmic radiation. Various forms of radiations are penetrating through us, through our planet, at every second, being influenced by factors, some of which we know, many of which we don't know. And to what degree these things are actually influencing the tectonic activity. These guys would say, well, maybe the moon has some negligible effect, maybe, because, it's big, affects the tides, But the sun, crazy. And these guys would generally brush it off completely, if not attack it. Why? What was their reasoning? This is what I'm going to try to cover in my class, which is more the methodology of both in the one sense, what are the actual minds doing that are making the discoveries in forecasting and affecting the new potential to save lives of man? And what are those minds doing that are not? Because what these guys are stuck in is the world of particles. These guys are saying, well, okay, the moon has a pretty big mass to it. We've got a mass. The moon has a gravitational effect on the Earth that's about 8 times greater than the sun. So thus, the gravitational effect, these forces, must be so much more powerful than the sun. Hell, it's so far away. And it's this belief that science is the study of how particles change in relationship to each other. And that's all. But how do you measure something like an X-ray wavelength? How do you weigh that? Right? How do you start taking this into the consideration of the ionosphere, right? These things make a lot of these fundamentally what these guys are statisticians. They make them very uncomfortable. And if anything, the only degree that I've encountered anybody from Canada so far admit that we can have any ability to forecast pertains to this idea of the elastic rebound theory. They say, well, okay, if anything, forecasting is hocus pocus, you can't do it, but maybe we got the elastic rebound theory. Anybody know what the elastic rebound theory is? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, you got it.
You
practice, huh?
So, what you're dealing with is the fact that there's a certain elasticity in the rocks and in Ilko. there's a certain elasticity in the rocks and the surface of the Earth. And when you're witnessing these plate tectonics move together over time, there's a tension that builds up. And when you get a snap, right, that's like a bounce. You get a certain kinetic expression of energy which occurs with that snap. So by measuring the rate of tension buildup, kind of like what they did when they're, with the cascade subduction, there's a lot of tension buildup there. At some point, you can forecast statistically that there's going to be a greater probability of some form of snap, of some, pop. And this is pure statistical mechanical thinking. It's useful, it's fine to use these things, but as a method of foreseeing the future, not science. Statistics can be manipulated, they can be misrepresented. Statistics are not science. And this is really the sort of the free market logic applied to geology, if you think about it. You guys, is that self-evident for everybody? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because what you're dealing with in the free markets, right? It's the idea that, well, you don't have economic collapses every day, right? Most of my life I lived without an economic collapse. It's sort of like one of these natural disasters people think of as being chaotic. They just happen, right? They hit. But sometimes they happen. You can ask somebody, well, okay, ask a free market monetarist, ask a Ben Bernanke, what caused the rise in Tunisia, right? What caused the economy to melt down and continue to melt down? And they'll say, well, demand outreached supply. You had a supply, you had a demand, you had certain forces between them. Demand wants the supply, right? Forces interacting. And at a certain point when that demand just gets too big, right? That tension creates a pop, a little rebound. Population collapses. Oh, why are people rioting in Egypt? Oh, elastic rebound period. Tensions pop. And then populations collapse, and then they re-equilibrate, right? And then they can build up the tension again until they get another collapse. And so you get the cyclical market theory, right? Markets go down. Bear, bull, bear, bull, bear, bull. Oh. And you can just sort of explain it away. Don't ask what Franklin Roosevelt did. Don't do that. Right? So this is very much of a disease in thinking, which permeates almost every branch of political, economic, scientific, and I would even say artistic thought in our society today. This method of thinking. Because, look, there are cycles in this universe, there are waves, you can't deny that, right? There are certain observable patterns. If there weren't, we'd probably never learn how to, walk for ourselves. Yeah, we never would have left the caves, probably. Right? There wouldn't have been anything to discover. But what are the higher principles by which we discover those causes of what makes these patterns happen? How do we go further? And so this is it. A lot of these guys ask us, hey, if we're, I've actually had 3 different seismologists ask me. They're like, well, I like your politics. Your political intention seems good. Physical economy, no bailouts for Wall Street banks. But are you just trying to get in cozy with the scientific community? Well, is that where you're bringing up is this like a gimmick? Bringing up the earthquake forecasting now? That seems like something totally different, right? And the only reply we can give is, no, we're here to kick the ass of the scientific community because you guys don't know what your job is or what your purpose is. Because you're taking part in something which is putting the lives of all of mankind at risk by virtue of how you're doing what you think is your job. And so it's easy for me to say, okay, it's all predictable. It's very easy to simply sputter that out. So I figured what I would do, just to go through a few preliminary examples of where we've come over the past couple of decades in our capacity to forecast these things, just to give you guys a clear sense that we can do that, right? Beforehand, though, the main categories by which this occurs, this capacity, is not in the material domain as such. It's not in rock tension, obviously, though that could be used. It's not there. You have ionospheric disturbances, electromagnetic disturbances, sudden bursts of ultra-low frequency and very low frequency emissions, thermal disturbances, infrared heat, things like that. And I added a couple too from abnormal animal behavior, and abnormal chemical reactions. The abnormal animal behavior, this is something which, again, this is not really, you can't say that this is science as such. This could trigger your attention when all of the rats start leaving your community, you know. You'd be like, all right, there's something wrong. Right? The rats are jumping off the ship, all right, I should probably find a lifeboat. There's certain, or you know, snakes all of a sudden start popping out of the ground, right? You're like, oh, okay, everyone's getting bitten by snakes. Something's probably happening, not normal. So you can use these indicators. And even you could say this year has been very interesting for that, because I don't know if you guys recall, but we've had hundreds of thousands of birds literally just showing up dead on the ground, right? Thrown completely off course. In Canada. We had about 20 million sardines or more show up on the shores of California, right? What happened? All these sardines and their school of fish got navigated completely off course that they ended up in a small harbor, ate up all the oxygen, and you got people freaking out because you know they can't get their ship out of the harbor. It's made of sardines. Right? And whales, whole schools of whales have been showing up in regions that they would never be. Humpbacks, belugas. And so why is that, right? Well, we know animals navigate their lives according to the electromagnetic spectrum. They see the magnetic field, they have a magnetoreception. All animals have this to varying degrees, but especially fish and birds. We know that pigeons can see Earth's magnetic field. It has certain qualities to it. And these are things which are being influenced by factors outside of the Earth's, you know, purview. Chemical reactions. I mean, we've known for hundreds of years. Well, we've known that you've had something which we later came to discover was radon being emitted on the surface waters above the fault lines, right? Days, even weeks in advance before an earthquake would strike. Now, I brought this up to this one woman who's supposedly the leading the leading seismologist on the Canadian Seismic Research Network. And her whole response to me, it was a surreal discussion. It was just, oh, yeah, I know that happens a lot, but it's just rocks bumping together and they release radon. Why does it always happen above the fault line? It just happens all over the place, but yeah, don't worry about it. Yeah, it's just some other crazy stuff. Okay, Pascal brought up the meter. The meter is one of many satellites being cut by Obama. And being saved by the Chinese. God bless them. But what does this thing do? Samoa, in 2009, experienced an 8-point earthquake. The meter, while going over Samoa, right over the fault line, produced 4 different variable spectra that showed directly that there's something happening that we should know about. This is 8 days in advance. And I'm sure you guys cannot see what these things actually indicate, right? You guys can't make that out, can you? No? Okay. Electron density, right? Because one satellite doesn't just do one thing. There's a variety of instruments on a satellite, right, that are controlled out. So, electron density of the ionosphere, the electron temperature, the ion density, these are all ionospheric. Right? The ionosphere, who doesn't know what the ionosphere is? Okay, that's the domain of supercharged plasma above the atmosphere of the Earth. It mediates cosmic radiation, solar flares, all sorts of things that would normally kill you. It's very good that we have it. I don't know what charge, if it's positive or negative or both, but it's charged ions. This is the ion density. So above the fault line, you have certain different densities of the ions, right? You can measure that. This is the actual earthquake. So you can imagine, during its orbit around the Earth, right, the satellite's flying, it's taking general measurements, and then all of a sudden it finds itself over the Samoan fault zone. This is where the earthquake strikes 8 days later. All right, what's happening? The ion density, visibly greater. It's a leap of like twice, double. Temperature decreases, falls. And you got a slight little aberration in the electron density itself too. Right. That's 8 days in advance. We weren't looking at that. This is only in hindsight when people decided to look back on the records and see what those things actually do. And I think for a while, before this thing was decommissioned, because the Demeter had a commission between 2008 and 2010 or something.
2004 and 10.
2004 to 10. At a certain point, you really only had like one guy down there on the Earth, like reading the data coming through. And you know, this guy's got to sleep too. You know, he's probably got a family. So we're not really doing much with this data. In this case, it's just accumulating and accumulating. Haiti. 200 and how many thousand lives? Haiti? 250,000. All right, the electron density, massive collapse of electron density. This is Haiti's earthquake. So all around Haiti, nothing, 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 bam, right? This maintains itself for 8 days. 3 days. We don't know how long it was doing that beforehand, but that's pretty straight. Alarm bell should be going off when something like this is happening. Now, Pascal brought this up. Biaggi, who's fighting like hell with various groupings of real scientists in this earthquake conference at Vienna right now, made a very important discovery that allowed him to forecast this Japan earthquake 10 days in advance. And he was looking at a factor that relates to the ionosphere, which is you've got a certain a Schumann resonance in along the Earth. So between the ionosphere and the Earth's surface, there's a certain very it's called extremely low frequency radio bands. They're on average, about 7 hertz. Your brain tunes to 7 hertz. This is like what we evolved in this type of environment, right? There were huge anomalous drops. This is 2005, according to 3 earthquakes that had happened, 7.2, 6.2, and 6.2. Huge anomalous drops in the amplitude that had happened right above these quakes. This is also what Demeter is taking on. And with this method is what was used by Biaggi and his team to make the discovery. Now, Biaggi is financing all of his revolutionary studies through his own pocket, his own personal grants by the bank, getting himself in debt, because there are no government grants for, as soon as you put prediction on your proposal for a scientific research paper, if it's not related to global warming, no, you're not going to get it.
His mother.
Yeah. So this is causing a shitstorm now. People are realizing the implications of this are huge. And this also lets us go back to see what other research has been buried that's been in line with these discoveries. And Dr. Anthony Fraser-Smith is a man who's been completely demonized and outcast from much of the scientific community, since he made an accurate forecast based on the similar ultra low frequency radio bands before the earthquake in Corralitos, California in '89. He's applied his discovery a couple of other times. It works relatively well. Biaggi's is about 80% successful. Not 100%, 80% is still damn good. Alaska, I put 67 and 64. This earthquake, I mean, it killed 109 people in Alaska, which, for Alaska, that's devastating. That's like half the population wiped out. I should laugh, but that's big. Now, this is the first time that they discovered, the very first time that it was discovered that the magnetic field of the Earth spikes before an earthquake. Seismographs that were measuring the magnetic field, the earthquake hit, they're not going to keep on taking their measurements, it's a seismograph, you know. But they found that 2 hours beforehand, these things went off the charts. You had a jump of like 10,000 Gauss. This has been taken up, again, by another research group. These guys are doing their own work at the Vienna conference, who published a paper it's called New Results on the Solar Impact on Global Seismicity, on Magnetic Field Index and Solar Maximum 11-year cycle. And this guy's Dr. Friedman Freund. He's been on the frontier with all this cutting-edge research. But what he just did is he just destroyed the argument that all of these statistical seismologists have, like the one that we've spoken to, who said, oh, there's no correlation between the 11-year solar maximum minute cycle, which we have all throughout the records. Sun usually very, very active for an 11-year trend, then goes very inactive, right? And it's something you can relatively measure. for quite long periods. They've been saying, no, there's no relationship between the seismic activity and this. Again, don't trust your statistics. This guy just came out with a concise report pointing out that the magnetic field spikes and the solar activity do correlate dramatically. It's astounding. And in fact, these magnetic spikes do correlate with earthquake activity. Again, this is another variable and a new perspective by which we can look at this. So we're getting a bunch of various perspectives to do the same job, right? We want to save lives. These guys the sun is a beast. This thing is not, when you look at the day sky, you're getting a tan. This thing is massive. It is throwing shit at us, the likes of which we couldn't imagine. Right now, we're going for the next 2 years, and this is why LaRouche is saying we should be prepared to deal with things like 10, 11, even up to 12 magnitude earthquakes over the coming 2 years. You want to be better safe than sorry, in all honesty. But you can expect this because we are going into the biggest solar maximum over 2 years. Maximum, the solar maximum is the maximum amount of solar activity. By 2013 it peaks before it starts going down again. And we are seeing what are called coronal mass ejections of high energized protons being bombarded at us, all at various frequencies. Every time you get a sunspot, you're getting a solar wind. This stuff is powerful. And these are all factors that these seismologists in the West who are antagonistic to discoveries are not looking at, because it doesn't fit in their current model. Right? This is it's a very blurry representation. I'm not going to go through all of this, but actually, yeah, we don't have to. This is basically the ionosphere right here. Above it is the exosphere. You got a magnetosphere above that. A thermosphere is the infrared domain of heat capture. Right? You've got a mesosphere, stratos, tropos. That's the little cities down there. And when you're dealing with the radio frequency, these ultra low frequency, either ELF, UVF, ULF, or VLF, they're all just basically very low frequencies. You're basically dealing with a pulse that happens all the time in all directions, moving throughout this domain here, between the ionosphere and the Earth. So they're not looking at something which is very real, it's very verifiable, and look, they don't recognize that the purpose of science is to see the future. In fact, the greatest secret here is that every human being has the capacity to see the future and act accordingly when the mind is trained. Every human mind, as a baby, has the potential to develop itself to the point that it can make discoveries. And that expresses itself in very useful, amazing ways for the society as a whole. Now, not a lot of people in society up until now have gotten a potential to express that, being most of the time under one form of oligarchy or another. But that's changing. So, we didn't create scientists to make statistical descriptive models. That's not why scientists exist. They didn't evolve with us either. Like, you didn't literally just have an evolution where all of a sudden you had a division of labor, and you had scientists, you had teachers, you had doctors that just like all came into the scene at the same time, right? These are products, these are creations of a cultural, civilizational evolution, right? Human beings had made progress in their relationship with the universe to the point that they found that there was new necessities to survive. Medicine, right? These things are a product of a need to fulfill a certain purpose, make people healthy. Right? Educators, teachers, these were created for a purpose too. Not to be a breadfed scholar, to make money and publish reports. So they don't get that. And because they don't get that, we have to kick their ass. Alright, so here's the thing. When you make a discovery, let's say you discover, okay, that there's a pattern, right? There's a pattern, you're looking at the night, it's all chaotic stars. You're one of the more innovative people who are actually seeing, okay, there's actually a repetitiveness to these stars, and you discover, okay, we've got seasons. I've experienced this before. There's been now an idea of, okay, the seasons are changing, there's a lawfulness to this. Now, all of a sudden, I can plan ahead. I know it's going to be summer again, it's going to be winter, I should probably plant more food now. You know, what happens to your population's potential to survive longer? Right? That former boundary condition that was there, inhibiting your population from living quite long, right? That's not there anymore. People don't have to die of starvation periodically, right? So your potential for successful survival is increasing. When you discover these higher cycles, the question becomes, do we just end there? Do we find a higher mechanism that describes the lower ones and be satisfied with that? And use our knowledge to sort of keep people needing us? You know, if the peasants don't know how to use fire and I know how to use fire, if I have certain knowledge about the motions of the heavens and other people don't, do I just assume that it's a fixed state and that I just build my own self-interest by keeping everybody away from access to that knowledge so that they need me? Or do I love truth more? Do I want to see what's yet still higher above that, organizing these so-called, you know, causal mechanisms? Do I want to go further? If I do, what's my mind doing? Because what I choose to do will say something about how I think of the universe. If I assume that the universe, if I assume that there's just some fixed state of cyclical change at some point, some mechanism that describes everything, the way a British empiricist like a Bertrand Russell or somebody else would just try and say that, okay, if we could just get all the formulas down, we can predict everything into the future and everything into the past, and we would know everything. We just measure everything, we get the right formulas. Right? Those formulas allow us to get a clockwork sense of how this clock is moving. Right? If that was the case, would the universe not be dead? Would there be nothing new really ever happening? Right? And whenever you see new bodies coming into this universe, right, the population is growing, they're consuming more energy to fulfill the functions of their survival. What's happening? Where are they taking that energy from if all of that energy was fixed? Well, they must be stealing it from the universe as a whole. More people mean the universe is dying quicker. Who wants more people? Holy shit. New change. Change will always be, in that sense, a bad. Take the universe. The opposite hypothesis is that the universe is always changing and always creating and becoming higher and higher organized, with more and more degrees of potential. This is economic forecasting. This is what LaRouche is doing, just so you guys are knowing. This is the type of method of thinking that we have to move our minds. Because when you look at the change, you have two options. If you're observing any change happening, whether it be in biology, or whether it be in economics, or whether it be in seismology, or in the stars, you could either take the standpoint that there is that got it written down. That the changes observable from Earth, life and mankind are simply processes within the universe and operate as closed systems existing as chance phenomena. You could localize those things from the context in which they exist. Right? I'm looking at seismic activity. That's the Earth. That's rocks moving. I feel bumpings when they rock together. You can take it out of its context and sort of investigate it as a closed system, right? That's one option. I can do that. That's within the universe. Or, let me take another approach. Maybe that the phenomena that are observable from the Earth are processes of the universe as a whole, reflecting a process inherent in the universe as a whole. So maybe there are no closed systems disassociated from anything else. Maybe everything is an open system that exists in a context, that I can't judge anything unless I'm taking into account a higher context. Now, what are the consequences of this? Well, the consequences of this one are that any discovery that I make in the universe will gain me insight into the nature of how that universe as a whole operates. That there's no disassociation, right? That's not self-evident. If there are of any process exists of the universe. Yeah.
If there's singularities. What about singularities?
Well, it's how we choose to see these singularities. Do these singularities exist disassociated from the universe in which they are singularities? Right, that's the thing. Right. Well, what they often do in terms of their method, they might pay lip service to the idea that they exist inside the universe, but when they actually investigate it as such, like look at Darwinian explanations of how evolution happens, right? What are they doing? They're investigating how one minuscule gene is mutating randomly to give you a certain type of species, and then they build up the environment from the standpoint of that individual species. The context is a secondary after effect to explain away the existence of the characteristics of that species that are being driven at the core by something very tiny, or just basically irrational change. It's chaotic change. You can't really know it, right? It just is. Yeah, and some chaotic changes result in a better capacity to adapt to an environment and then procreate more. But only when tension exists. See, the thing is, it's the same thing. Elastic rebound theory, free market theory, Darwinian theory is the same thing. The evolution will only occur under that paradigm if there is a tension. If you have 5 species existing on a region, I'm going to make a segue for a second. I'll go back to the issue, I promise. But if you have 5 species existing in a terrain where 10 species, that has enough food to feed 10 species, there's no tension, right? Where's the impetus to adapt, to survive in that environment? There's none. So it's only when the species start becoming so compacted against each other that the real struggle for survival kicks in. And then the adaptability will happen. But these are closed systems. And you'll find this, if you think about this and start looking at every single field of thought, you'll tend to find this reflected again and again and again. Huh?
Or the conflict in the religious belief between mind and body.
Oh,
So
yeah,
that's
sure.
an example, where the body will grow out of the material and the spiritual world.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. That there is a world that's purely irrational and emotional. That's where I keep my spiritual self, my artistic self, the kind that feels, and then I've got my utilitarian, rational side that I keep to my logic. Right? You got this schism. There's 2 separate worlds, right? Meaning they both exist within the soul. Why would you schism me? Why would you do that? What is it?
And talks like this.
Why? And talks to you sound like a robot. So let's take a case study. Okay, the implications. Let's say I take this first hypothesis, right? And I'm going to get back to the earthquakes. But let's say you take this first hypothesis that change is observable from the Earth, life, and mankind are processes within the universe and operate as closest to existing as chance phenomena. Let's look at an individual, right? First, you got somebody says, "Oh, okay, I've got my vice. I smoke. I'm just an addictive personality. That's my type, right? I get addicted. I like sensual pleasure. I just get addicted to things. That's who I am." Right? That's general. They're taking a generalization that they're applying onto their identity and saying, "Okay, that's why I don't break out of that sculpture." And take it to the society level, right? Everybody around me in society seems to be short-sighted, greedy, lazy. Often, I'm in a greedy, short-sighted society. Thus, based upon the fact that everybody I see around me is greedy, has these characteristics, they have these behavioral patterns, I'm going to I'm just going to apply that characteristic as a generalization to mankind as a whole. Mankind, thus, I make the statement, right? Thus, mankind is naturally intrinsically greedy, survival of the fittest, lazy, doesn't think of the future. And so you say that generalization will be, I'll return to my economics, that will be my way of explaining away ups and downs of the business cycle. Why do economic collapses happen? Because of that. Why do economic renaissances happen? Because we want to make money. People want to make money. That's why, they're greedy. So that's why you have a New Deal. Don't think about it anymore. All right. But then you have to deal with the fact that there are anomalies. This is a cycle which then breaks down if you then look at something like the Renaissance. Right? What is the singularity that breaks the cycle, that doesn't fit? Right? Because the Renaissance, we know that the Renaissance was a process that occurred around 14 to 1500. And this is a process which was based on certain key conceptions of Leonardo da Vinci, of Nicholas of Prusa, of Kepler's, of individuals who applied concepts that were not in existence in any time prior during the Dark Age. Right? There were certain concepts that were applied to man's self-organization, the idea of the nation state, the idea of modern science, that didn't exist in the Dark Age. These concepts, they didn't come about by some material business cycle. So how do you explain those away? Right? Well, you could be like my father would say, you know, they were just lying. They were actually just they were just deluding themselves, thinking that, oh, love of man, man is made in the image of God. All these are just concepts. They're nice things to say because they give you power if you say them. People believe you. But they're not really that. Or the second response you tend to get from a lot of baby boomers as well tends to be, well, they were just anomalies. They were abnormal. Martin Luther King, Franklin JFK, Lincoln. Yeah, these guys are just, it would be nice. It'd be nice if people like that could be like that. If get more people like that, but
They just got lucky.
yeah, they were lucky. They were not really lucky because most of them got shot, but they were lucky, you know, because they actually got to partake in something that was much greater than themselves, and they knew it. But they would say, okay, these guys are outside of the norm. The norm is the me. We are, right? But it's a fear. Because as soon as they admit that in fact, these universal geniuses, these small minority, are actually the norm, if this is the normal condition of a human development, a natural mature human being, to be a Da Vinci, or Kepler, or Martin Luther King, then all of a sudden they have to confront the fact that what's unnormal is them. Is it? Right? Is the habits, the desires that are culturally embedded in themselves that are actually that are leading to the cause of the collapse that we don't like happening, right? Nobody wants these bailouts on Wall Street. They don't want to cut the budget, right? But yet, they have to admit the fact that that's the abnormality. It's right there. Human beings are not in their nature when they're in this state of mind. And that's where the tension comes in. Because this means we could all gain the potential of any of these great personalities. Any of us. Now, okay, let's talk about earthquakes, right? Okay. So what do we know? What do we know? We don't know a lot. We know some things. Some things that the experts think they know, we don't know. And a lot of things that they're saying we don't know, we actually know. So let's just clear ourselves of a lot of let's get to the basics, right? What do we know? Well, we've been in an ice age. We are in an ice age right now. Ice age. You guys know that? You know? We're in an ice age. We're in what's called the Holocene. The Holocene. The Holocene is the last 12,000 year blip on the screen of warmth. Yeah. For about 12,000 years, we had a great flood. All religions talk about this to varying degrees, right? Everything melted about that period, 12 to 10,000 years ago. Sea levels rose 400 feet, or 400 meters? Feet. It got really hot. It got warm. We had periodic cycles between them, but generally we've been in a blip on the screen. 80,000 years before that melt, we were in an ice age. Montreal, 2 kilometers of ice right above us, 12,000 BC. Right? So that was 80,000 years. Before that, you had another little blip on the screen. It looked a little bit like this. Is actually the stages. 1,000 years ago. Oh, sorry, 1 million years ago. 800,000, 600,000, 400, 200, now. Thousands of years, right? Each of the dotted lines, these are 100,000 years. Today, we're up here in that blip. Okay, so it's relatively periodic, right? You got every gray spot, about every 80, 90,000 years, you got a warm blip. What do we know? Okay, we're not going to find the answer to an ice age here on Earth. No. But you do have the Milankovitch cycles. And so you're dealing with things like the precession to equinox. This guy Milankovitch came up with, he's a scientist in the turn of the century, or 1920s, 30s. This guy came up with, he made a threefold discovery. That in order to account for earthquakes, ice ages, you have to take into account the fact that there is a precession of the equinox, right? So every 26,000 years, you got a little wobble of the Earth as we move around the sun. So literally, you're watching the whole zodiac make a certain 360 over the course of 26,000 years in the night sky. You've got the obliquity, which is the basic angle of the plane of the ecliptic to the angle of the Earth, the axis of the Earth. So the plane of the ecliptic is the plane that the Earth shares with the sun. The angle, we're not directly 90 degrees, right? We're a little bit bent. Yeah. We're bent now 23.5 degrees. That also changes. There's variability at every 40,000 years. Then you got the eccentricity, which is much greater. That's 95, 125, and 400,000 years of a cycle. The eccentricity, which is we're on, anybody know what the eccentricity is?
No.
No? Okay, that's basically the ellipticity. You've got a distance between, on every ellipse, there's two focal points, right? There's a middle, right? Two focal points in the middle of any ellipse, because every single planet is on its own ellipse. That distance will tend to change. It'll tend to pulsate. And as you have that change of distance, it's called the eccentricity, the nature, the quality of the orbit as a whole will also fluctuate. And that'll happen on these greater cycles, usually 95 to 125 to 400,000. These, as an interconnected, I don't know what the solar forcing is, but that's also very good. These three things together will give us the only one we've come to so far of understanding the major, at least the dominant variables influencing these plunges into deep frost.
Excuse me, did you say that every 80 to 90,000 years we plunge into deep frost?
Thereabouts. It's not constant. Like, you're never going to find the exact same thing happen. But yeah. All right, 700,000 years ago, magnetic poles reversed. So when you look at a compass, it points north, right? You know it's not pointing to the actual north, geological north, right, of the Earth. It's not pointing to the North Pole of Santa Claus. It's not truly. It's pointing to this to the magnetic pole. It's about 1,000 kilometers away from the actual physical North Pole, and that moves. That also moves quite a bit. So does the South Pole. So this is a variable process. This is what your compass is pointing to. It's been pointing north for about 70,000 years. We call it, I don't know why, but we call it the Brunus normal. I know what they call it normal because it's what we live in. But why Brunus, I don't know. Before that, we had about from about 2 million to about 0.7 million years ago. What was north is actually today's south. Except for these two blue blips, right there. You had a strange fluctuation during that time. Don't know why, but before that again, you had about a 40 million. No, that was about 500,000 years. It was back to how it is today. What's up?
Do you know how we came to know that?
Yes.
How do we come to know that? Like over that long period of time?
He just asked how we came to know that. That's a good question. That bothered me for a long time. That's why I didn't even believe people when they said, "Oh, the poles are shifting." I was like, how do you know that? How do you know that? Well, there's certain there's things like magnetite in lava, and what happens is you have a generally regular flow of certain volcanic activity, and the magnetic minerals inside of the lava, when they're very hot in lava, they tend not to magnetize. Because you have this thing called the Curie effect by Pierre Curie. He discovered that every single mineral, or every single element, it has a magnetization that gets lost when it gets hot. And every single one has its own breaking point. Like iron is like 600 degrees. What they discovered, so that it's not magnetized while it's still in lava form, but when it pops up and starts cooling, it will magnetize according to the magnetic polarity of the Earth. And so you can generally, as you probe deeper into the geological, layers, you'll find that all of a sudden, all of these magnetites that are polarized in one way, all of a sudden they're polarized another way, and you're like, okay. It's because they're coordinated by the higher electromagnetic field. So this has been going on for a while. We can only go back maybe about 14 million years. We don't know what, I mean, we lose our ability to measure out the magnetic polarities of the magnetite. Beyond that point, it gets difficult. But we've got about 13 million years where we know this thing fluctuates on a regular basis. Every 220 million years, the sun revolves around the galactic center. That's 1 year for the sun. Yeah, 360 days for man is 1 year for the Earth. No, 220 million years for man is 1 year for the sun. This is not our galactic center. This is a facsimile. For anybody who thinks that we actually have a satellite above the Milky Way, we have not done that yet. This is another galaxy that we speculate is in approximation to ours. Galaxies are usually either spiral or they're whatever. Okay, our Earth, or our galaxy, has about 5 arms. 4 big, 1 short. We're on the short one. Right there, I don't know if you can see it, that's our sun. Right there. Nuclear bulge. So the time it takes for the sun to travel through every single one of these arms and back again. Or not through every single one, but to travel around the center and back, 220 million years. Yeah. Yeah, that's the plane. The opposite view. Okay. Oh, I point out to maybe one thing. All right. 500 million years ago, let's take a step back again, right? Another cycle above a cycle. We've been probing above cycles, subsuming cycles. But then 500 million years ago, this is a mystery to most archaeologists. Everything went extinct, almost. All the creatures living in the sea, not much was living on land at the time, but you had a huge, our fossil records just drop off the charts, nothing happens. And then all of a sudden you have what's called the Cambrian explosion. This is where invertebrates came onto the scene, other forms of more complicated life, basic mammalian life, the most basic variety here. And you had a series of ages that we'll call all the way up to the Quaternary, which is around today. And this brings us to our real focus here, because in taking these greater steps back into the past, our capacity to foresee the future is also being increased, right? We're seeing now, okay, there's things to be prepared for. Maybe these things don't statistically, they may not happen in my lifetime. But since I'm not a creature of the senses like the animals are, and I have a capacity to access posterity, right? I have an idea of my grandchildren and their great-grandchildren and other people's grandkids. Because that's the nature of humans, we can do that. Animals, they just, they're self-interest. Their self-interest is themselves and their immediate pack and environment, their family and their immediate community. Human beings can go a little bit above that. So, all of a sudden I realized, okay, there's something to take into account. Because every once in a while, I've got these collapses. Things are generally moving in an upward direction, becoming more complex, right? Higher degrees of expressing life. But then you get these drop-offs, right? Something's happening there. And this brings us to something that our basement team now, our science team has been focusing on as being really the core to get people to really make the emotional breakthrough on the nature of real economics. Right? Because this here is the real sort of metric of what we have of mass extinctions and new species explosions, new species coming onto the scene, without any missing links. There's no missing links happening. You literally got. That's the thing about Darwin's theory, right? You can never explain how there's no missing links. It's something that people have been very comfortable with for a long time. But you have these new species coming to being that we don't fully understand how. And there's a group of scientists that have recently applied what's called Fourier analysis onto this flow, and have discovered two interlocking cycles which are governing this process. You've got, this is the 62 million year curve.
Say that again.
Oh, I said 62 million years ago, the dinosaurs disappeared. No, sorry, 65 million years ago. Right. And what they discovered is that on a 62 million year basis and on a 140 million year basis, you have mass extinctions. Now, humans have been on the scene approximately, give or take, 2 million, 3 million years. So we know that the last mass extinction happened 65 million years ago. Humans have been on the scene about 2 to 3 million years in some form of fire-making species that we have traces of. What is happening? Now there's a variety of hypotheses to get at what is occurring governing these cycles. And the two most advanced ones that we have so far are the following. This is generally found all around the world. Archaeologists have noticed that there's what's called it's called the KT extinction. You've got a period between one set of rock layers and another set, an upper set, which contains a thick gray claystone with 1,000 times more iridium, which is a very radioactive substance, than anywhere else on the Earth. It's very rare, and you usually only find it in asteroids. That's usually the greatest concentration of it. So this stuff, there's a clear separation of the type of life forms that we find in this. Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, what's that? What? It's iridium. Iridium, yeah. And so this divides the... Yeah, found on asteroids. And this divides a type of fossil species. Like the quality of fossils that you'll find below it and above it are totally different. Dinosaurs are only found below it. I know we've actually just recently interviewed somebody who discovered another great crater, an asteroid crater in Australia, and has been doing work on this. I've done my homework on him. I know that the only asteroid that we know of the magnitude required to spread iridium all over the Earth. Now, I'm not saying this is what causes the dinosaur extinction alone, but all evidence points to this being a very important effect, or part of it, is in Mexico. You have a 600-kilometer radius of something very big that hit about radioactive dating shows was about 60 million years, give or take. So this is something to take into consideration. I mean, what this Russian scientist is saying, the head of the Russian Roscosmos, is saying is very important because, we need a comprehensive, organized system of nation-states that have satellites in space to not just observe the ionosphere and things of this sort, but also things like asteroids, which do tend to pass us once in a while. You look at the moon, for example, as a good test case of a planetary body that doesn't have human civilization on it to protect it from asteroids. That thing is like Swiss cheese, yeah? That's what I was trying to think of, not check.
There's even one I saw on the website. There's a giant thing the size of Earth that hit Jupiter not long ago.
Oh, yeah.
And we don't know what it is, and we don't have the means of finding out what it was, but it caused a lot of ruckus, and it's the size of Earth hitting Jupiter.
That's where they're going at?
It's nice to know.
Yeah.
And Jupiter is the...
Okay, here's the other. The other aspect, the other clue we have is that the only other periodicity of 62 million years occurs, and I didn't make a slide for this, so luckily we have this thing. Who can't see this? Anybody?
You want somebody to hold it?
No, that's good. When the solar system bobs above and below the plane of the galaxy, the galactic plane, something happens. But this is a 62 million year cycle. It's about a 62 million year cycle. Now, if you didn't notice, we're not always on the plane of the galaxy. Our solar system is not always on a stationary, fixed plane. We're bobbing. So right now, this is the galactic plane of the Milky Way. We are now about 40 light years above the galactic plane. We're an upward trajectory, right? 62 million years it takes for us to cross this galactic plane, where there's a high density of cosmic radiation of other forms of, it's some gaseous substance that we don't understand, but that's probably not good for the lungs.
Good to know.
We spend the rest of the time below it. Now, the last time we made an upward movement was when the dinosaurs disappeared. So when the solar system was going above, to the above part, something is hitting us. There's something occurring that's not found on the southern side. That's weird to say southern when you're talking about the galaxy.
That sounds cool.
One side, nothing is happening, or something is not happening. That is happening on the other side. That's very, very aggressive to life. Huh? Bad. Yeah. Yeah. So that's one. Another element that we have to take into account is that it's about once every 140 million years or so that the solar system travels through one of the arms of the galaxy. Right? Because we're not always in the same arm of the galaxy. I didn't know that. But it's kind of like moving on a highway, and a lot of cars are moving slower. We're like driving past these cars that are moving at a slower rate. It's kind of like that. So the galaxy's spinning, but we're spinning slightly faster, so we're moving through these arms. That's why you could have 5 arms, and it only take us 220 million years to go through them all. Or go all the way around. Otherwise, we would have had to get 5.
Very long time. Wish it would be a little faster.
All right. What is this? So there are two things to take into account. One is that our galaxy itself, it's not just the sun that has a certain magnetic field, but the galaxy itself has a certain magnetic field that protects us from all sorts of shit. It's moving in a certain direction. It's called the bow shock, which is the intergalactic medium, which is slamming into us, and the force exhibited outwardly by the magnetic field of the solar system. These two create a certain tension in space. So there's no empty space, otherwise there would be no tension, there would be no bow shock. A lot of people think in terms of empty space, but that's not the case. You have galactic pause, which I don't know what that is. Yeah, this is about the Milky Way. So there's one thing we know is that we are tending to head towards, in the general direction of the Virgo cluster. The Virgo cluster is a grouping of stars, grouping of solar systems actually. Grouping of galaxies, yeah. The Virgo cluster, if you got really close, you'd see that these are a shitload of little galaxies clustered together. Now, every single galaxy is emitting X-rays, gamma rays, all sorts of rays, stuff we haven't even discovered on the electromagnetic spectrum. Gamma rays, they only go so far. There's probably other stuff happening. That's the general stuff that's being thrown at us.
Yeah, I thought we were supposed to say something.
That's right, I need to get shit out of here. But it's interesting to note that the moon quakes, the quakes that are happening on the moon, because for about 7 or 8 years, when NASA was actually still not being destroyed by a fascist, we had established seismographs on the moon to get a better sense of what causes these things. And for 7 years, we were taking a series of moon quakes. And we found that of the 28 biggest ones that had happened, 23 of them had occurred while the moon was facing directly towards the Virgo cluster.
Very big.
So that's interesting. Can't say much more about it than that, but it's something. Another interesting thing is that the moon doesn't have any tectonic plates. So how are these earthquakes happening without tectonic plates? If tectonic plates are actually causing the earthquake, right? So that immediately challenges that theory. Because that's the thing. We're already in space. We're in intergalactic space. I don't want to spend too much time. So
We're in too deep.
yeah.
I mean, this process is happening, and we can't really do anything about it. I mean, the only thing we can do, as you say, is we might be able to predict where some natural disaster might hit. But I seem to be doubtful whether we can escape the radiation, which could really fry us.
Well, look, this is the thing that people said about
At the high powers, our bodies may not be constituted to withstand. Obviously, they hardly withstand the sun's rays today without getting cancer.
Well, check this out. Look at the arguments that were happening around Benjamin Franklin. He was talking about harnessing lightning. Now, people said that was crazy. Lightning, that's like power of the gods, which human beings, we're little us, we can maybe run away from it. We can't control that stuff.
Okay, so you're thinking that maybe we were going to harness these
I don't know what we're going to do. I don't know what we're going to do. All I know is that there's a certain power in man to really, you couldn't possibly foresee what human potential is in a lower domain. Like in the domain before the discovery of electricity, you couldn't imagine that we could actually harness this stuff to power our hospitals and our refrigerators and our...
Maybe some spaceships we can come up with that.
I don't know. But
Do
the
you
point being is...
have enough time, for all this before we're all talked about here?
Well, we've been out here for a few, I think we got some time, yeah. But I don't think we should waste time at the same time. Here's the thing. Because that's the thing. Time, it may say time is relative, but it's running out in a certain sense for civilization. Like this current potential, this window of potential that we have to make these revolutionary changes that we were just talking about, with the new redwoods, the global Glass-Steagall. If these aren't initiated, we are heading for a dark age.
Yes.
We can know that by looking at the other dark ages and see what variables are at work. So there's a potential window of opportunity that is open, but it's going to be closed if we hesitate too long. We've got a little room of wiggle room, but not much. But this is why thinking a few billion years in the head is very, very useful. It gets people out of their general habits, their closed habits that are keeping their minds from accessing the solutions. Solutions are there. I mean, it's relatively elegant. It's not that hard, really. JFK did it. It worked. We just have to take this further. Yeah, sure. But this is why, again, you think back, what we're doing here, we are not investigating something in the universe. When we're investigating the universe, and we're investigating our minds, investigating the universe, there's something of the universe as a whole that's being created. Right? This is the key. We're not just adding things to our mind. It's not like our mind that we're like pressing sense impressions onto it. There's something higher occurring. So LaRouche and Sky Shields, the head of the basement team, they've been putting a lot of emphasis on the Crab Nebula as being something we just got to figure this out. These are four spectra of the Crab Nebula. And I'll wrap this up soon. I see people might be getting a little tired, but these are four spectra of the Crab Nebula. One in X-ray, optical, like basic visual. If you looked at the Hubble telescope, you get something like this. Radio waves, infrared. Right?
What's the purple one?
The purple one is another nebula whose it doesn't really have a very exciting name. It's GRB. Yeah, sure. Well then, who has not heard of the Crab Nebula? No? Okay. No? You guys heard about the Crab Nebula? No? Okay. The Crab Nebula was something that was observed by Chinese astronomers in about 1044 AD. It was a huge thing that you can even see in the daytime for for a few years. So you look at the sky in the daytime, there's a giant thing. It occurred about 5,000 light years away from us. So the actual explosion, the creation of this nebula as a new state of existence in our galaxy happened actually about 5,000 BC, thereabouts. Sorry, it's about 6,000 light years away from us. So it took 6,000 years for that light to travel from it to us. 1144 us. Now, today, something very funny has occurred in the last 3 years. First of all, this thing's been bombarding us with a constant flow of gamma rays for about as long as we've been measuring gamma rays. Right. Now, this has been so constant that we have been using it as a standard to calibrate machinery in aerospace. We've actually been using this as it's so constant. It's like when you look at an atomic decay clock, right? There's a constant rate of emissions, more or less. Right. But you've got such a constant rate that we've been using it to calibrate aerospace machine tools according to this thing. Now, this is fucked up. In 2008, and I think again in 2009, somebody can correct me, I don't have the exact figures, I don't remember them. But you had a huge explosion of gamma rays of about 3 magnitudes. So that's already a lot of gamma radiation, but that gamma radiation that it emits exploded 3 magnitudes of increase in the course of about 3 days. And in the course of 1 day, it collapsed, it maintained for a couple of weeks, and then it collapsed back down to its constant rate, to its regular rate. This is a rate of increase of gamma radiation. Gamma radiation takes a lot of energy. I mean, from what I've been told, this would normally, by our current knowledge of nuclear science, that process of increase would take tens of millions of years. That decrease even longer, because that requires a lot of power. This thing did it in a day. And this is a gamma ray Fermi's telescope shot. Keep in mind, because we don't have the manpower that we're funding, because we're all fixated on budget cuts, we didn't even observe this happening until after it happened. It freaked people out. This has thrown a huge wrench in the machinery of what we consider science, because this goes against all. Like none of our language and none of our formulas can describe how this is happening. This is impossible. But it's happening. Right? So again, there's something to figure out. Here's an exact metric of it. There's the jump, there's 3 spikes, and then the median collapse back to the constant rate.
When did this happen, 3 years ago?
2009, September 2009.
Everything happened in 2009.
Oh, I wouldn't get numerological about it, but yeah, look, I mean, things are happening.
Powerful year.
Yeah. All right, so this Virgo cluster. This is just one. Yes.
Okay, Virgo cluster.
Yes.
Now, what you said about the moon quake.
Yes.
Wouldn't it be hypothetically possible that the Virgo cluster was projecting something onto our planet right now?
It always is.
On Earth?
Sure. But this is the thing about the north side of our galactic plane. When we're on the south side, our galaxy is protecting us from whatever's being bombarded upon us by the Virgo cluster. Now, yeah, no, we are being increasingly exposed to whatever this is.
But if there's a...
Well, that's the thing. I mean, this isn't something that's going to necessarily, I mean,
If there's
you've got a lot of...
turn,
Yeah, but check it out.
from south to north and north to south.
Well, no, I mean, this is the thing that you've got to be prepared for, is how do we calibrate these types of things to deal with? Because, look, you've got a lot of New Age cults that have come about since the 1970s that have honed in on like these real aspects of science and have created a spiritual, almost religion, a cultish religion out of them. Over the 2012 Mayan calendar thing, you've got all these things that have been, it's sort of like hijacking what real frontier science was occurring in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and then making it a freakish, cultish thing about the end times. And you've got different spiritual New Age interpretations of massive consciousness and all sorts of stuff. But you got to keep in mind that these are scientific processes that, like, 2012 is bullshit. Like, there's no sign that this is the end times in 2012.
It looks
But
like.
you do have, over the course of long durations of time, the polarity of the magnetosphere has been decreasing. Over the course of the last 100 years, there's been an ongoing decrease, which we know accompanies a pole shift. The pole shift, I mean, this is something which isn't going to happen very quickly. It takes some time. But the point is, all of these processes are knowable, and by knowing them, we can act on them in such a way that we save human lives, right? And that's the thing about a space program. If you're putting human beings in space, if you have a serious Mars program and other things to measure the size of grass on Mars to see what's happening there too, then you have to keep your human beings, your human colonies alive. Meaning you have to know more about biology, what shields us
There's
from
a lack
cosmic
in
radiation.
flexibility on a lot of planes. In other words, there's a lacking in flexibility on many, many planes.
It's just a lack of creativity.
Yeah, that's basically it.
That's all there is lacking. Is creativity and the guts to do the right thing.
That's it. Right there, that's it.
With blocked.
Exactly. Gotta get out of the creative block. You're about to fight. So I'll end. I was going to end with something else, but I didn't have time to put in my PowerPoint, so I'll end with this. This is a segment of a speech given recently by Lyndon LaRouche called Ireland in America. It's just a segment from a question he was answering on economics. And there's two of them. So I need somebody with a good voice who can be picked up by that camera who would like to read. Want to read? Here, come closer. Sit over there so the camera can.
Where do I sit here?
Stand on the table.
Okay, I'll start now. So we have to use higher in a sense. We go to higher energy flux densities. We go from burning wood to the improvement of charcoal and up the scale, up to nuclear power, up to thermal nuclear power. And the destiny of mankind is always to go to these higher states of power, because the Earth is not a fixed system. The Earth's system is always being changed. We're using things up. Therefore, we have to make up for what we're using and do more by increasing our productive power, which generally means more fire or higher forms of fire, more management of the Earth, management of the water systems, management of the growing areas, these things. And so that's the way you have to approach it. So therefore, what you need a planetary-wide system of cooperation among respectively sovereign nation-states, which cooperate with one another in building up these platforms of higher levels of technology to compensate for what we're using up, and to go on to other things in space and beyond. And thus, then we base our production not on some jerk who's got a little firm as such. He's not going to change this society. It's these large-scale developments which can only be organized by governments and combinations of governments. We agreed to make an improvement in the preconditions for production on this planet, in this nation, in this territory. We share that because it's in our interest that they progress in this respect, as we do. And therefore, we come to the common aims of mankind to develop the platform on which production will occur, which means the general technology and so forth, all in one platform. We are raising that platform of productivity so that man is outracing what he's using up. And therefore, nations must cooperate in developing these platforms and understand that credit for the utilization of these platforms in forms of technology applied to produce things we require is what we have to do.
That's a bit.
And those platforms then provide provide the basis, which is done by nation states, not just by individuals, but by nation states, which cooperate with other nation states in developing these platforms. And then the nation states, in turn, then have national projects by themselves, or in cooperation with other nations, which are production programs which depend upon the steady progress in raising the level of these platforms. And that's what we have to do. And so therefore, we need to understand that mankind is a unity. The idea of competition is overdone. The issue of nationhood is not competition. The issue of nationhood is cooperation among people whose culture is different, because you can only develop a people in the culture of its children. So therefore, you must have sovereignty of nations because of the culture of their children. You must then have cooperation among these nations in common aims of mankind. Therefore, we need to eliminate the monetary system, have a fixed exchange credit system among nations, and then work together on the common aims of mankind. And fostering those things within other nations which we agree is useful for mankind to do. And that's what we need. We need something with much more bite to it than the idea of doing good things. We have to be really revolutionaries.
Yeah, if there's any questions, we have till 10 o'clock.
I'm secure they're becoming more that they want to push out and build.
Yeah. No, I think that that's a correct observation. And that's the paradox of the empire,
Yeah, exactly.
is that the closer the empire comes to achieving its own desires,
Yeah,
the closer it is to ensuring its own death.
yeah.
And you'll find that the oligarchy of Rome didn't come out better for having achieved their desires when Rome collapsed, right?
Well, so if what we're watching now is basically a system that is on the
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right.
Well, one thing I can't understand, and I couldn't really explain it to my sister who I saw recently, and it's this. She said, well, if these ideas are so good, which I was trying to share with her, why is it that there isn't anybody in the governments that I know of who are willing to put them into practice? And these people are bright people. She said, well, why in America isn't there anybody who's taking these in the government and saying, let's stop the cuts and let's do what LaRouche says? And I mean, I just found it hard to answer her, because, I mean, it does seem so self-evident to me all the time, and has for so many years, that this is the rational thing to do. And is the only answer, well, everybody's irrational and we're the only product? How would you say? How about we why would they rather cut their throats? You know what I mean? Well, everything we're seeing is madness. Why would they rather destroy themselves?
Well, that's where things have to get. I mean, people have to tackle the epistemological side of things, which they generally shy away from, because as soon as you let your mind go there, you have to start confronting your own way of thinking. And that's what subconsciously makes a lot of people afraid. Because,
How can people not be afraid when they've been forcefully directed since the age of 6? How many people really reach their full potential? And if you take one individual that maybe endured a tremendous amount of child abuse, so his nervous system is shot, and then you throw him into a system where many children are like that are telling them exactly what to do. The person at the age of 20 is sort of like this.
well, that's the thing. Look, free will has got a much greater power than most people imagine. Human creativity does too. On the issue of what your friend is going through, I mean, she's got what most people don't understand is that great changes are usually not voted upon by the majority. It's not like everybody in history voted to have an American Revolution or a Civil Rights Movement. It's that it's always the smallest minority, which is generally doing things that most people have no conception of, for the good and for the bad, which have the greatest impact upon human life. And these are conspiracies for the good, which we have to discuss. And a lot of people say, like, how do you trust LaRouche? Because, if these ideas were so true and so good, then why are they being adopted? He must be lying. Well, no. Is that says something about the culture that you're in. If his ideas are so true and so good, then what's wrong with the society that's not responding to that truth, right? And that gives you a bit of a better focus. And on the question of I'll take those two, but on the question of the free will, it's similar because animals can't break out of conditioning. But yeah.
It's not a question. I just remember what LaRouche also said is because the baby boomer generation now sitting there in the Congress, a lot of them have the money invested and they don't want to let go of the money.
That's a delusion, holding on to a delusion.
Yeah, but it's a hard money system.
Yeah, sure.
That's why they don't want it to go, because then their wealth would go there.
What was your thought?
My thought was just a comment for your sister. And I find that helps when I discuss these issues with my friends. If you try to say, like, what did society think of Martin Luther King or Mahatma Gandhi during their lifetime? They were not the popular person. Their ideas were not popular, but they did fulfill truths. So if you try to step back in time, and tell your sister to step back in time and look at those people, how popular they were, and what was thought of them until after their death.
Right, yeah, a lot of them are unpopular in
Yeah.
hindsight.
Yeah, hindsight.
And if not, they're promoting the dark age.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, look, you're in a culture where what's popular and what's normal is what's stupid and what's evil. I mean, that's generally the sad condition, you know? So, now that Pascal has situated the political context in which this meeting and what I'm about to discuss is occurring, I decided to focus on titling my side of the presentation, Forecasting Mankind's Survival. Because it's really here at this domain that we're seeing now, at this particular battle that we're seeing over the issue of forecasting and the earthquake issue, the coming together of the political and scientific fight, which up until now a lot of people have been keeping in different parts of their mind's considerations. Because you have your idea of there's the political, the economic side of life, which is just sort of manipulating social theory. There's human beings, they have desires, and that's the domain of where I learned about politics. And then you got to the domain of science, which is rigorous fact collecting to create models that better and better describe or approximate our universe. And these two things are generally kept aside. Now we're coming down to the point where we're seeing that the issue of how the human mind comes to know how that universe in which it evolved operates, and by making such discoveries act upon that universe to change it for the better, is not just the domain of science, but it's also the domain of politics. And this is now what we're seeing coming through with the two different sides of the fight today, where there is an impulse to survive. We see that coming from what Pascal went through with Russia, with China, and there are networks within, leading networks, that are taking the lead in considering, based upon what we know of earthquakes, what we know of the earth upon which we exist, how human beings can save lives for the future, because there's a lot waiting for us out there that we still just don't understand. But the key here is that we can forecast earthquakes. We don't have it down to a precise, perfect science that we can figure out 100% of the time. But to varying greater and greater degrees, human beings have been forecasting earthquakes for thousands of years. Now, again, the actual establishment of this as a science, an actual object of science as such, is a relatively new phenomenon. But we have records going back to ancient China, where people have been observing things like the chemicals that would be emanating from the soil, the different animal species that would behave in a very bizarre way, that would give people indications that something, you might not know exactly what is going to happen, but something is happening, because we're in a very dynamic, changing ball float moving through a very dynamic universe. And on the other side, you have a political intention to cover this up, because it's also been known for a very long time that with ignorance, with confusion, with fear, a population is best controlled. And the more people know about the processes that govern their destinies, the less they're afraid, and the less they can be manipulated by people who come offering security in exchange for some freedoms. And this is what we're seeing coming through, not in all networks. People who are both self-conscious as being a part of the suppression of knowledge, as well as those who are just, in a certain sense, victims, but as Pascal went through, the sort of bread-fed scholar, people who have made their livings carving themselves into a certain mode of thinking that got them peer-reviewed papers published, that made them careers, by which their very identity, sadly, has been associated, who are instinctually, not out of any ill will for the human species, but instinctually attacking those very discoveries which are now coming out, which would allow the human species as a whole to survive into the future. And this U.S. Geological Survey, I can't go from one meeting to another. I don't know what's the next slide. Now this U.S. Geological Survey isn't just attacking the very fact of mankind's capacity to forecast earthquakes, volcanoes, seismic activity, but they've actually been, what our movement has actually discovered over the past week is that they've been fudging the data, taking the statistical occurrences of earthquakes over the past century and saying, well, okay, even though everyone is asking, are we having more earthquakes now? It seems like every time you turn on the TV, something else is happening, right? But you go to their myths section on the website, and sure enough, they say, oh no, that's not true. Actually, if you investigate all of the 7-point earthquakes or more, they've actually been decreasing statistically since over the last 100 years, especially in the last decade. And sure enough, if you wonder, there is actually a greater intensity, and our capacity to forecast these things is located on how we choose to move our minds. What method do we choose to investigate these phenomena? And most people today, I know certainly I, before we started to discuss, like really digging into this, before the Japan earthquake, most people today tend to think of volcanic activity, earthquakes, massive natural disasters as being somewhat chaotic phenomena, you know? Like they happen, it's really shitty that it happens, you don't know where the next one's going to be. You know, there's certain places that are of a greater likelihood than others, but we really don't know. There's kind of an air of tense nervousness, especially if you live on the coast of Indonesia or something. You know? And so they happen. You consider, well, okay, it's chaos, it's unluck. And this is not true. This is the fact that we can actually make actions, not only discover when these things will occur, but then make the important actions to save millions of lives. And the fact that that's being held back is already an intention to genocide. Considering that there is an intention, this isn't just misfortunate mistakes.
It's a cover-up.
Yes. And so what do we know, right? You take a look at the world, and we've made a series of videos. I'm not going to go through all of the science necessarily here in this presentation, but I will try and give a general overview.
You have to explain that we're doing translation. I think people don't understand. We're translating.
Or maybe you could
Can
stand
you
up
go
and
back more or something?
Oh, sure, yeah, that might be a good idea if you guys do go back a little bit more.
stand up and
The voice does travel.
translate for everybody.
What was that?
No,
Parce que
no, standing up is not so good.
pas d'anglais.
No, that's not such a good idea. If you actually check out the statistics, yes, if you just look at every single earthquake that's been above 7 points, they've been decreasing. We've been having less. But here's the fudge, here's the rub. When you look at every single, if you say, let's look at every single 8-point and above earthquake, now we're talking a huge jump in magnitude, 8 points to 7 point. 8 points is 33 times the magnitude of a 7-point earthquake. It's an exponential growth. A 9-point is about 1,000 times more than an 8-point. So if you take every single, in your mind now, right? You say, I'm going to look only for those 8-point and more earthquakes and see how they've progressed. Have they gone down? And in fact, what we come up with at this point is that we're seeing the greatest jump from 2013 from the 1990s to 23. from 2000 to 2010. And we've had, in the last few years, we've had 2 9-point earthquakes already. The last 9-point earthquake that we had, anybody know when the last 9-point earthquake was before this decade? Huh? Indonesia was one, yeah. We had Japan, Indonesia. But who knows before Indonesia, before the year 2000, when the last 9-point earthquake
One
hit?
in LA?
No, that was No, that was less than 9. It was actually in the 1960s. Yeah. I don't need to show them that yet. That's okay.
If you want to.
It's okay. It's all right. Yeah, no, last time we'd seen anything like this was in the mid-1960s.
Where?
For some reason it's escaping me, but I'll get back to you.
Alaska, 1964.
Alaska in 1964? Right. So,